On today's date, stay tuned for an American Minute with Bill Federer.
A signer of the U.S. Constitution who was licensed to preach? This was Hugh Williamson, born this day, December 5th, 1735. He studied divinity in Connecticut and preached in Philadelphia nearly 2 years till a chronic chest weakness convinced him to change careers. Williamson then entered medical school and during the Revolution served as Surgeon General to the North Carolina troops. As a scientist, Hugh Williamson joined Dr. Benjamin Franklin in many electrical experiments and wrote a book on climate, giving scientific explanation for the credibility of Noah's flood and Moses' Exodus.
This has been an American Minute with Bill Federer. For a free transcript, call American Minute at 1-888-USA-WORD.
VCY America presents Crosstalk, a nationwide call-in program discussing issues that have an effect on our families, our communities, our churches, our nation, and our world. Crosstalk, an opportunity for you to voice your concerns for biblical principles. And now live by satellite and around the world on the internet at vcyamerica.org. Here is today's Crosstalk.
And good afternoon. Welcome to Crosstalk here on VCY America. Ladies and gentlemen, on many occasions, individuals will do something as a means to remember or keep track of a significant event in their lives so that every time they see it, it's going to be a reminder to them. Perhaps it's been a spiritual decision or perhaps some significant event that's occurred. I mean, we see the children of Israel who gathered stones as they crossed the Jordan and built a monument so that future generations would ask, when they ask that question, what meaneth these stones? They could recall how God led them through and provided for them. You know, as a nation, we also put up monuments, not to worship, but to remember individuals or events that have impacted our nation in a significant way. And yet it's these statues and monuments that are under attack. Why is this happening? Thank you for joining us here today on Crosstalk. It's our privilege to have in studio with us Dr. Tim Schmig, Executive Director of the Michigan Association of Christian Schools and Director of Stories and Stones, author of Stories and Stones, Our Heritage of Evidence, and also has led some of our VCY ministry trips. Tim, good to have you here in studio.
Thank you so much, Jim. It's a blessing to be with you today.
Yeah. And Tim, as you know, there's just really been a deliberate attempt, an attack really, going on to rid us of any remembrance of the founding of our nation and our history. Why do you why do you surmise there's such a concerted effort in this regard?
Well, I think part of it is this. Today, they look back through the lens of their own personal experiences, and they judge our founders based on what we call presentism. And they weigh the actions and the productivity of our founding fathers and those who have gone on before us based on what they feel is right today, which is very unfortunate because the reality of it is, all of us are flawed. All of us have contradictions in our lives. All of us have made mistakes in our lives. And we don't need to have those illuminated and expounded to the point where they get torn down. Realistically, our founding fathers are not perfect, and none of us are perfect. The present-day Protestants tearing down the monuments, they're not perfect. And yet, if you look at our country through the lens of idealism, we will be weighed in the balances and found wanting. But if you look at our country's history based on the times that they lived in, they gave us some pretty amazing things.
They have, and there are many, as you know, who try to argue that we are a secular nation. Mm-hmm. And the question, though, is if that is the case, then why are there so many spiritual themes that we see in monuments, especially in our nation's capital? Yes,
and they put that up as a testament to the providential plan and the providential protection that they had. You take to our very first founding document, the Mayflower Compact. It starts out, in the name of God, amen. It's a document that starts out with a prayer. And then it says, undertaken for the advancement of the Christian faith. And then we sign our names to it. And it's interesting that when you take a look at our founding documents, the Mayflower Compact, the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, our state charters, all of them are being signed by the people that are there at the time. And one of the reasons that they're signing it is because the worldview that they had They believed they were making a vertical covenant with God, a horizontal covenant with each other. Hold me accountable for what we're doing. It's very clearly an evidence that they are accountable to God, and they wanted fidelity to the past, to honor those who have gone on before them, that got them here, and then also faithfulness going forward for future generations to look and say, these men signed away their lives, their fortunes, their sacred honor, so that we could have this birth certificate to the greatest, freest country this world has ever seen, and we are supposed to be custodians of that heritage.
It was called the Grand Experiment.
It was, absolutely.
And yet we are seeing, even with our flaws of the past and our flaws present, that there is no other country that can rival the United States as far as these documents.
No, and you take a look. If you and I went to any junior college campus or any college campus in America, and we were to say, can you name 3 founding fathers? Typically, if they can name 3, they'll name Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, George Washington. And then, if you ask a follow-up question, what do you know about either one of them? Second thing they'll say is they own slaves. And so, is there anything else about the life of Thomas Jefferson that would merit consideration, would merit study, would merit contemplating the things that he did and why he did it? And if you take a look at the volume of our founding fathers from 1770 to 1805, there's probably 300 or 250 major characters. And today, we know 2 or 3 of them. There's a wealth of people. And all of our founding fathers were recipients of common grace. And by that I mean the rain fell on the just and the unjust alike. They realized for the most part that there was a divine being, and they would have to one day give an account to that divine being. And in their public proclamations as officials of their either colonial charters or state governments, they were, I can't say that they had a biblical worldview, but they at least honored biblical principles in the things that they did.
Dr. Jim Schneider, our guest here today on Crosstalk. Let's talk about some of these monuments that have come under attack. The New York Post reported just a couple months ago a story about the New York City Council. They said they're advancing a bid that could yank monuments honoring Washington, Jefferson, and Columbus. So let's begin talking about some of these because we have a very distorted presentation of these individuals today. Let's begin with Washington. What should we be knowing about George Washington?
Well, a man of character. When Ronald Reagan gave his first inaugural address in 1981, he said directly in front of me, a monument to a monumental man, George Washington, father of our country. He led our nation out of Revolutionary War into infant nationhood. He set the standard for what a president should be. He was a man of character in that he paid chaplains the exact same amount of money that he would pay a captain in the military. He thought that his soldiers should be attending divine services. He had a standard for himself that a series of principles that he wanted to live by, rules for civility. And so, judging by the standards of the day, he was a man of character.
And yet, so many people have insisted, and you referred to this earlier, that he was a slaveholder. As such, there should not be a monument remembering him or any slaveholder. How do you respond to that?
Okay, so first of all, slavery was not an American invention. We inherited it from the British, which is what we were at the time. Paul Revere never went through the countryside and said the British are coming because we were all British. He would have said the redcoats are coming, the king's regulars are coming, the king's minister's own are coming. He would not have said the British are coming. We inherited a couple of really bad concepts from the British as colonists. Their lousy roads, we inherited that from them. Their very poor agricultural systems, we inherited that from them. Their caste system. In colonial America, there was the very rich and the very poor. We inherited that from them. And yes, slavery was a part of the American culture. The fact that they owned slaves, many times the slave owner would give them manumission or freedom upon the death of the slaveholder. Except in the state of Virginia, it was very difficult to free a slave if you were indebted because the people you owed the money to got the slave as payment of your debt. So to just let them go, there were laws against that. And so we look at it and we just say, okay, it was a very unfortunate thing. We certainly don't condone that, but we say that was typical of the times. And we were not the only country that had slavery. And today, slavery is still worldwide. I mean, I'm not sure exactly what the statistics are, but I think they've said there's close to 25 million people enslaved today.
It's also very interesting that those who enslaved, those known as slaves, were of the same skin color.
Exactly. That's how we got them from Africa, from the slave traders there. And most of the slaves didn't end up in America. They ended up in the islands south of us, in that they were on the plantations, the sugar plantations, and other things. We got a few of them, and proportionally fewer than the Caribbean islands did.
You mentioned George Washington being a man of character. There are those who really wanted to make him king.
They did, and he turned it aside. And when you take a look at the life of George Washington, immediately after he died, there was a reverence for him. As a matter of fact, you could get a Washington Bible. The salesman that would go city to city, they would put an imprint of a caricature of George Washington in the front, and they would sell the George Washington Bible. Then, a period after that, you go into the debunking period, which is the Parson Weems period of the stories that are probably myth, or at least some mythology to them. And then you have to get up into the total debunking of, well, he swore, he did this, he did all of this and everything. And it's like, okay, we understand all of us are flawed, all of us have contradictions, and yet we take a look at the good that he did for this country, and I think that needs to be celebrated.
Let's take a look at another individual whose statues and memorials have been under attack, and that is Thomas Jefferson.
Yes, well, Jefferson, one author called him the American Sphinx, in that you can look at Thomas Jefferson's writing at any period in his life and see a number of things totally contradictory in his life. A brilliant statesman. He writes his notes on the state of Virginia, and he travels Virginia, makes observations, has things that are said about that. He starts the University of Virginia. He's one of the authors of the Declaration of Independence. It's interesting when you look at his obelisk at Monticello, he does not list being president of the United States. He writes the Virginia Declaration of Rights, religious freedom, and all of these things that he does, and yet he is a slaveholder. And he's also a very poor money manager. He dies deeply in debt. And one of the ways that he gets out of debt is he sells his extensive library to the Library of Congress. When we took the VCY tour and we toured the Library of Congress, I had folks go in and look at the Jefferson Library. And to me, it's just amazing that you can look at books in this room that Thomas Jefferson would have held or possessed or looked or read from. So, yes, a man of tremendous contradictions. And then you also have to look at Jefferson's life on a timeline, because when he is the governor of Virginia, when he is at the Second Continental Congress writing the Declaration of Independence, he has a respect for spiritual things. Later in his life, when he's trying to start the University of Virginia, and he wants to hire a professor by the name of Cooper, and Cooper is an infidel, a non-believer, and the pastors from the Valley area, Charlottesville, say, if you hire Cooper, we will not be sending any of our students to you. Well, at that point, he's older in life. He has no public position as far as government position, and he writes some pretty vehement things against clergy, against the deity. And so you look at it, when did he say this in his life? It was not indicative of all of his public statements early in his life.
Dr. Tim Schmig with us here today on Crosstalk from, directs Stories in Stone, but also is executive director of the Michigan Association of Christian Schools, and has authored Stories in Stones, Our Heritage of Evidence. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be back in just 1 minute here on Crosstalk on the VCY America Network as we talk about the topic today, What Meaneth These Stones? And we're going to look further here today at other stones that have been under attack today, that of Christopher Columbus, that of Abraham Lincoln, and some other information as well that we trust you'll find quite fascinating as we see this attack taking place across our nation. You're listening to Crosstalk on VCY America. Back in 1 minute.
Back to Genesis with Dr. John Morris, author and seminar speaker with the Institute for Creation Research. Dr. Morris, since in the Garden of Eden people were eating plants and certainly insects died there, can we say that there was no death before sin?
Chris, creationists insist on the biblical doctrine that the wages of sin is death, and that Adam's rebellion brought death into a once very good creation which had no death. In doing so, we must be careful to use the right terms. Certainly Adam and Eve were commanded to eat fruit in the garden, and this implies plant death. It would also be difficult for Adam to avoid stepping on an ant as he walked around. But is this death? The Bible never uses the term living for plants or insects. It teaches that life is in the blood and speaks of the breath of life. Thus only air-breathing, blood-filled animals lived or died. Chris, there was no true death before sin. Let's go back to Genesis for our perspective on these things.
Thanks for joining us for Back to Genesis.
This is Crosstalk coming your way from the VCY America Network. Dr. Tim Schmig is with us today, Executive Director, Michigan Association of Christian Schools, Director of Stories and Stones, and author of Stories and Stones, Our Heritage of Evidence. Friends, we're talking about this attack that we have seen more recently in recent years against the monuments, against the statues of our nation. We're talking about some in particular that have been targeted, George Washington. We have schools that are even changing names from some of these individuals. Another we were just talking about was Thomas Jefferson. And before we move on to someone else, Tim, I'd like to ask you about Thomas Jefferson in particular, because there are many who will hold him up and say, well, he is the one that promoted and came up with the idea of separation of church and state, and therefore we should not have the church engaging in the affairs of the state.
Well, in 1801, when the New England pastor Leland rolled a 2,000-pound cheese to Thomas Jefferson, guaranteeing Jefferson that the cheese was milked from Republican cows out in the New England area, he brought this massive cheese to the White House and gave it to Thomas Jefferson, the executive mansion at the time. That very same day, Thomas Jefferson answers a letter from the Danbury Baptist, a group of Baptist churches in Western Connecticut. And in that, they are asking the question, will President Jefferson, like his predecessors, declare days of fasting and prayer? And in that, Jefferson makes a statement that there is a wall of separation between church and state. And what Jefferson's concept of the wall of separation, I think, has been most clearly defined by Dr. Dan Dreisbach from American University, where Jefferson's concept of the wall would be between the federal and the state government. He had no problems with state governments promoting days of fasting and prayer. And the whole idea of that letter, the Danbury Baptist letter, it lies dormant until the mid-1800s, when one of the Supreme Court justices remembers that his law professor mentioned that letter. So he contacted the Library of Congress and said, we need a copy of that letter. I'd like to see it as we are adjudicating this case. And so we don't have Xerox machines back then. So the clerk copies Jefferson's letter word for word, almost. Jefferson says that this is the legitimate power of government declaring days of fasting and prayer. And the clerk mistranslates the word, and he says this is the legislative power of government. And all of a sudden, that misstatement in the letter, it enters the American lexicon. And so that about 1860, 70, you get that in the one Supreme Court case, mentioned a few more times. And then you come to the Everson v. Board of Education Supreme Court case, where the whole idea is, can a public school bus be used to transport children to a private parochial school? Justice Hugo Black, the Ku Klux Klansman, is the one who writes in the Everson case that there is a wall of separation which must be held high and impregnable. So since then, Jefferson has been quoted as far as the author of Separation of Church and State multiple times, every single year. And even during Jefferson's lifetime, they tried to credit him with the First Amendment. He says, no, I didn't do that. I was an ambassador to France when they were debating that.
So therefore, it's very much a misnomer as far as this well of separation.
Oh, yes, it is, and it's unfortunate, but other things like that have happened in history where miscommunication, wrong identification, it's like, okay, this is our present reality. We deal with it, even though there's no way we can unring that bell.
Yeah. Tim, let's talk about another one of these monuments, and I know we could spend a whole program on each one of these characters
Absolutely.
here, but let's talk about Christopher Columbus for a bit. We were trying to erase him, Columbus statues coming down, and also, I mean, even looking at the calendar, there are many who have no longer allowed for Columbus Day, but we have to have Indigenous Peoples Day.
Yes, exactly. And in Washington, D.C., right outside of Union Station, they have the Christopher Columbus Monument. It had a fountain to it. That hasn't been working in years. In, I think, 1992, somebody put red paint all over the monument. And to me, that's a modern phenomenon in the last 100 years, because in 1892, the equivalent of the National Education Association printed a New Testament in honor of Christopher Columbus. So for the first 300 years, we venerate the man, and we are thankful for, and I love it, discovering a new world. All right, and you know, you take a look, and obviously he's another one of those who should have known better. And so we look at through the lens of today, look back, and they should have done something different. And they didn't. What the modern day Protestants do about our history is, first of all, they criticize it. They should have known better. Then they try to correct it. Well, he could have done this, but he didn't. And then they condemn it, and part of the condemnation is tearing down the statues, taking names off schools, removing murals from government offices, and these types of things. Because they must think that if it's out of sight, out of mind. But the reality of it is, we've been given this as 1 Corinthians chapter 10 says, history is given to us, number one, as an example. We learn something good from them, but also the word ensample means scar or mark. And if we get a scar on us because we didn't do things well or we did something stupid, we look at that scar and we think, oh yeah, we don't need to do that again.
Right.
And so sometimes the negative lesson is just as powerful as the positive lesson.
Let's talk about somebody else, and that is Abraham Lincoln.
Yes.
And you know, we talked about slavery, and many would say, you know, Abraham freed the slaves. How could it be that he is being targeted in all of this? And yet, you know, the Emancipation Proclamation came under him, and yet one of the monuments known as or statues as the Emancipation statue has been come under attack as well.
Well, there you go again, because I don't think they thoroughly understand what they're doing when they tear down the monuments. They see a monument, it needs to be torn down because it's a monument. Even to the point of total insanity that out in Seattle, they wanted to tear down the monument to Jimi Hendrix, who is the patron saint of rebellion. Why would they tear down that monument? When we go to Washington, D.C., and we stand at Ford's Theater, we turn across the street and we look at Peterson House, and there's a museum to Abraham Lincoln there. There is a 4-story circular staircase, and the staircase is surrounding books about Abraham Lincoln. There are more books written about Abraham Lincoln than any other president, of the rest of the presidents combined, probably. And to study the life of Abraham Lincoln, number one, he kept the nation, he kept the Union together. He did what he had to do. He was a man who, for his time, was very wise, very eloquent in the things that he did. You go to the Lincoln Memorial, you take a look at his second inaugural address off to the left-hand side. It is the most theological statement in American history. It's just replete with Bible references, prayers, requests that as we go into a national healing after the Civil War, that there would be kindness shown to the widow and to the orphan, with malice towards none, with charity for all. And for whatever reason, you know, he didn't do enough. Well, he did everything that he could. And as a matter of fact, when you take a look at the American experience, the men who signed the Constitution of the United States, they were slaveholders, the southern states, not a few in the middle states, very few in the northern states. But in order to get this country after the Revolutionary War, they had to have a compromise. And the compromise was, we're gradually going to phase out slavery. It doesn't work, and then we have the Great Civil War. We're the only nation that's fought a civil war to eliminate slavery.
It's very interesting indeed. And when you consider the proclamation that he did, day of prayer, of fasting, reconciliation, and so forth, he talked about all the wonderful blessings that we had as a nation. But
we have forgotten God.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. And he understood, that basically he believed, I think, in the providential view of history, that ultimately there is a divine providence over everything. Man is responsible for his actions. Man is responsible for the things. And one of the things that he talks about in his second inaugural address is that God punishes national sins. And this national sin of slavery, the punishment for it, has been the Civil War that has killed almost 750,000 people. Almost every family, North and South, was touched by the Civil War.
Yeah. Dr. Tim Schmig with us here today on Crosstalk, and our topic today, what meaneth these stones, and talking about this. And Tim, I know there are so many more monuments and statues and individuals we could talk about, but I'd like to approach this from another aspect, and that is, when I looked, and as I was preparing for today's program, all of a sudden some of these communist goals started coming through my mind. Here's goal number 30 from the communist goals. Discredit the American founding fathers. Present them as selfish aristocrats who had no concern for the common man. We're seeing that fulfilled.
All right. Well, think about it. Today, the hymn of today's Protestants is "In Mao We Trust," and they have "How Great Mao Art," and they look at the communist model and they totally ignore the 20 million people that were killed in these communist regimes, and they look at this and they use it to denigrate it. Eldridge Cleaver and others would say that basically the history of the United States, a quote from Eldridge Cleaver said that the government of America was a government of the pigs, by the pigs, and for the pigs. And then they talked about the fact that we need to destroy the past, condemn the present, and rewrite the future, which is exactly what communist China did with their plans and with their Cultural Revolution. They destroyed the past so that if we can destroy it, it didn't happen.
So, friends, I want you to understand one of the communist goals is for a discrediting of the founding fathers, and that is part of the goal. Here's another one. Goal number 22 says, continue discrediting American culture by degrading all forms of artistic expression. Eliminate all good sculpture from parks and buildings. Substitute shapeless, awkward, and meaningless forms.
Oh, absolutely. And I get that. And yet when they tear down the Thomas Jefferson statue, when they remove it out of the City Hall of New York or where it was, I don't think they're tearing down Jefferson the man, but they're tearing down Jefferson the ideas that he was able to plant in seed form in our country. Things like freedom of speech, trial by jury, scientific inquiry, individual liberty, the rule of law. He would have very much assented to, if you want good laws, follow the 10 Commandments. And so are they tearing down the statue of the slaveholder or the ideas that he put in seed form in this country, which has basically given us the greatest, freest country in the world for the last 250 years?
It's because those stones remind us of those ideals.
Absolutely. They're a testament. And when Israel went into the Promised Land, when they were to create the monument, it was a national monument with a spiritual heritage. What mean ye by these stones? Well, there was a day that the Jordan River was 3 times its normal width at flood stage. God miraculously dried that up and brought us here. And so we look at the monuments to some of the giants on whose shoulders we stand. We cannot criticize them for not being able to see as far as they could. We shouldn't criticize them for decisions that we know today they shouldn't have done. Just like I think it's humorous. All of us have done this, but we look back to our high school graduation pictures and we think, what was I thinking when I bought that suit? All of us have regrets.
Fifth quarter quarterbacking.
Exactly.
So
Monday morning quarter. That's it.
Right. And we see that being played before us. Friends, a quick break is coming before us here, and just a little bit more discussion, but we'll also be providing you opportunity to call in on the program as well. So certainly be formulating your questions, your brief comments for us here today. Dr. Tim Schmig is with us, and asking that question, what meaneth these stones? Looking at some of the attacks that are taking place, but what is the motive behind this as well? And we are seeing the communist goals are very much at play in destroying our nation's heritage. We'll be back in 1 minute. You're listening to Crosstalk on the VCY America Network.
high in the Swiss Alps, Lucian, a lonely, frightened 13-year-old, is overtaken by catastrophic events as he causes little Danny to fall off of a cliff. Lucian finds himself an outcast with his family, his school friends, and especially the very hostile Annette, the sister of Danny.
Danny, I've told you not to talk to Lucien. He'll only hurt you again.
Bitterness and anger set in. As Lucian finds solitude in the nearby woods, he comes across a woodcarver who helps him find the peace he was looking for that not only changes his life, but that of others as well.
You may be able to run away from the village, but you can't run away from yourself.
Treasures of the Snow quickly captures the heart. It's a story of friendship, forgiveness, and redemption. Treasures of the Snow is available on DVD for a donation of $16 or more by calling VCY America at 1-800-729-9829. That's 1-800-729-9829.
The program is called Crosstalk, and it comes your way here from the VCY American Network. With us today, Dr. Tim Schmig, as we ask the question, what meaneth these stones? As we see the heritage of our nation under attack in so many different ways, we see it, manifest through the taking down of monuments, murals, paintings, anything that having to do with these. Yet, it's amazing when one goes to the U.S. Supreme Court building, how many places in that building are engraved the Ten Commandments and Moses. Tim, there's great significance that the founders had etched into these buildings. That is our heritage.
It's our heritage, and it's not just, there's Solomon that's there, there's Moses that's there. Mm-hmm. On the eastern side of the Supreme Court building at the pediment, there's Moses holding the Ten Commandments. Mm-hmm. As you walk into the Great Chamber, you will see an oak panel door there, and it's got Roman numerals 1 through 5 on one side, 6 through 10 on the other side, which if you Google it, go to that fount of all knowledge, Google, and it will say that is the icon for the Ten Commandments.
Not the Bill of Rights.
Not the Bill of Rights, no.
Tim, we know that the education system is being used to accomplish these communist goals and to accomplish this upheaval that's going on. Listen to goal number 17. Get control of the schools. Use them as transmission belts for socialism and current communist propaganda. Soften the curriculum. Get control of teachers' associations. Put the party line in textbooks.
Do you think that's happening today? I would say that for any parent out there, for any grandparent, I firmly believe that the last best hope for patriotism in America, for love of country, for instilling character in young people is either homeschooling or put your child in a Christian school. And the reason for that is people put their children in a Christian school for the things they can't get from the government schools. And it would be character and Bible study, and then also prayer, and teaching young people that there is a responsibility. I've often been asked, working with the Michigan Association of Christian Schools, how do our students do in the real world? Because if you compare the government schools, Caesar's Palaces, to our schools, there's no comparison by gymnasium, science lab, computer lab, and yet our graduates get accepted in the military academies, all the places that they want to go. They do a commendable job. And the reality of it is, we haven't seen the real world east of Eden. We live in a fallen world right now, a world that has set its back to the Lord and not turned its face to the Lord. And so we work with fallen people and try as best as we can to say, follow me as I follow Christ. And I do believe it is God honoring to honor the things that the Lord has given us. And Isaiah chapter 6, as the seraphim who shout day and night, the whole earth is full of his glory. Yeah. We need to see his glory and the Lord in our history and celebrate those things and make sure that they're passed on to the next generation. Ronald Reagan said we are one generation from destruction.
Wow. That's sobering, folks. Let's open our phone lines here today on Crosstalk. Our number 800-733-9829, 1-800-733-9829. Our guest today, Dr. Tim Schmig, and we're talking what meaneth these stones, and perhaps you have noticed matters going on in your own community, or certainly our nation's capital as it relates to the attack that we've seen upon remembering the heritage of our nation, whether it be that of statues or morals, I should say statutes as well, because that is very much the case. Our number 800-733-9829. Tim, aside from the school aspect that you just mentioned, how should believers respond in such a time as this?
Well, I think that we need to speak up. We need to have a voice. I would say responding either by calling into programs like this, writing a letter to the editor, showing up at school board meetings, but letting their voice be heard, maybe writing to their elected officials, or better still, when their elected official is back in the district and they have, coffee with the congressman or whatever. Talk to them about these things. Let them know that you are concerned, because there's a concerted movement to have these monuments destroyed, to have an educational system that promotes indoctrination rather than education, and speak up to our elected officials. And if your elected official is not satisfying to you, run for office yourself. Mm-hmm. And there's nothing that says you can't run for office. And always remember, we pray for our elected officials. The Bible tells us, I beseech therefore that first of all, prayers, supplications, intercessions, giving of thanks be made for kings, for all that are in authority. Pray that the Lord will change their heart. And if he doesn't change their heart, pray he changes their occupation.
And I know this is vitally important, Tim, as we consider even the movement that we've seen where schools have gone very woke in the materials that they offer. And there are a number of believers today in various school districts who said, I am going to make a difference. I'm going to run for office. And we need more individuals who are going to run for office, whether it be city council members, county board supervisors, state legislators, and certainly congressmen and U.S. senators as well.
Oh, absolutely. We're supposed to be salt and light, and salt in the salt shaker doesn't do much good. It's got to be applied into the society, into community.
Let's go to the phone lines. We have Dick calling from Washington. Hi, Dick. You're on the air.
Thank you, Jim. A little addition of information about Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson authored the Northwest Ordinance, which is north of the Ohio River to the Great Lakes, west to the Mississippi. And in that document, written, I think it was 1787, he banned slavery and involuntary servitude.
Tim, your response?
We knew that as we progressed westward, once we got over the Appalachians and we realized how much land there was, and that was one of the things that Jefferson did with the Lewis and Clark expedition. How much land do we have, and can you find a waterway to the Pacific Ocean? Once we realized how much land there was, then you've got the great debate. Congress is divided almost equally between slaveholding states and free states, and what's the representation going to be? That's where you come up in the 3/5 principle, and then also you've got the Missouri Compromise as far as states going westward. Are they going to be slave states or free states? But that is a good point. The other thing with the Northwest Ordinance is he instituted education in each community that was there. And then also another thing that I think is pretty interesting, if you travel very much in the East, the roads there can be as complex as any math problem you've ever seen, but it was said that in the Northwest Ordinance, roads would run north, south, east, west, except by the lay of the river or the lay of the land.
Very interesting. Thank you, Dick, for the issue here today.
Thank you.
Let's go to Jeff next in Garland, Texas. Jeff, you're on the air.
Good afternoon. I was just calling to ask why your guest keeps referring to these people who are wanting to remove all this stuff from our history. Why does he keep referring to them as Protestants?
Because they are, they're protesting. They're the protesters.
Okay, so it's not Protestant.
Not Protestant not by denomination, but they're protesting something that they really don't know the principle that they're protesting from. I guess I should have clarified that earlier.
One other thing, if somebody was in an effort to preserve our history, if you will, let's say for like an end times type thing, to try to keep a history, some kind of a record, has anybody ever thought about putting together some kind of a list of concise works that kind of pretty much discusses these founding fathers and our history, so that, hey, this is so we can tell future generations, having a record, so to speak. Say, this is what really happened.
Jeff, thank you so much. And, we've interviewed William J. Federer many, many times on this station and on Crosstalk. And one of his works that is just masterful is America's God and Country Encyclopedia of Quotations.
Mm-hmm.
And there you'll find references to God, going to the presidents and statesmen and founding documents pointing to that. But he's got a library of books dealing with these issues and has been interviewed often concerning them.
Bill Federer has done a wonderful job. David Barton has done a wonderful job. Scholarly work, anything by Dr. Dan Dreisbach, as far as the research and just the intent of what Thomas Jefferson was writing about with his letter to the Danbury Baptist. There's a wealth of information out there. You want to make sure that you're going to reputable sources. The researchers who are going back to first source documentation.
Dr. Catherine Millard is another.
Yes.
And she's got some great works. Thank you, Jeff. Malcolm in Osprey, Florida, you're on the air.
Good afternoon. Congratulations that you're talking at last about The Naked Communist, a book that is now an American classic. 0.2% of all books that year made that level. This book was mandatory reading, published 1958 from the congressional testimony in 1956 by Skousen. And this book was, as I said before, an American classic and necessary, mandatory reading for the FBI and CIA from 1958 to 1972. In 1972, the House Un-American Committee was abandoned, but mainly by two people from Michigan, and I'm also from Michigan, John Dingell and John Conyers, both very active in the communist movement. They abandoned and discontinued the House Un-American Committee in August of 1972. Therefore, the communists have had free reign in America since that date. This book should be mandatory reading in all high schools in America. I'm trying desperately to get it into Hillsdale College, and I'm meeting with some resistance there, which means the communists have infiltrated that institution too.
Well, I don't know whether
I don't know about that, but
conclusion.
what I would say is this: today, the truthful telling of our past is truly in a moral freefall, and it's being rewritten. I want you to listen to this quote by Chief Justice Earl Warren. And if you know anything about Earl Warren, if you traveled anywhere in the South during the 1960s, there would be billboards that said, "Impeach Earl Warren." Time magazine, 1954. I believe that no one can read the history of our country without realizing the good book and the spirit of the Savior have from the beginning been our guiding genius. Obviously, they're trying to rewrite our history, and they're trying to rewrite the history in their own image, because if you can destroy the past, then you control the future. And if you destroy the past and take these men of stature out of young people's lives, then you can reinsert new idols in their place.
Malcolm, thanks for the call today.
You're welcome.
Mary is calling from West Des Moines, Iowa. Mary, you're on the air.
Yes, I'm glad they mentioned the Naked Communists. I was wondering if some organization like yours or other people that are always reporting these opposites, if it could just be printed on 3 or 4 sheets of paper, and it could, what the communists, their manifesto is and everything, and what they plan to do, and then the quote from Lenin or Marx that says, "useful idiots." Mm-hmm. And then you can parallel it on the right with what has happened actually, and then ask a question: are you being a useful idiot? If so, rethink and look at this information and save our country or something like that. And then it could be thrown from airplanes.
Well,
thank you, Mary.
I think what we want to do is we want to light a candle rather than curse the darkness. And by lighting a candle, it's being aware of what's going on in the culture. I think that every Christian should be aware of the Communist Manifesto, the Humanist Manifestos 1 and 2, so that when we see these ideas being circulated in the public square, which another thing that they talked about was the communists, the socialists, they want a naked public square, in that they do not want any sort of religious references or anything like that in the public square. So we need to speak up and we need to be aware.
Thank you for the call. We're up against a break, and thank you, Mary. Our number to Crosstalk is 800-733-9829, 800-733-9829. I mentioned Bill Federer before. Let me just mention his book, America's God and Country, Encyclopedia of Quotations. We do have that available through our ministry, as well as a book on socialism in which he lists all the communist goals. That is there. And you can reach out to our switchboard, 800-729-9829. But our guest has also written a book. We'll tell you about that after the break in 1 minute.
For the Worldview Report, I'm Brandon House. Our website is worldviewreport.com. I'm not sure I ever thought I would see the day, but in late November 2023, the former director of the National Security Agency, and he was also the director of the CIA at one time, General Michael Hayden, retweeted a tweet. And the picture was of a lady, probably in her 60s, holding a Bible, and then her handgun, and the American flag, stating, I am committed to the Bible, a biblical worldview. I believe in the Second Amendment, which comes from a biblical worldview, the right to defend oneself. And she had the flag. I'm patriotic. I believe in honoring those who have sacrificed for liberty and freedom. Well, the former NSA CIA director retweeted that and said, when asked with a picture next to a terrorist, what's the difference? He said, no difference at all. That's how they view us Christians.
What meaneth these stones? Our topic today on Crosstalk. Dr. Tim Schmig is with us today. And by the way, he's written a book, Stories and Stones, Our Heritage of Evidence. Tim, where can our listeners get a copy of the book?
It's available on Amazon, and they can just go right there, put my name, Schmig, Tim Schmig, Stories and Stones, and they can pick it up there.
Okay, SCHMIG.
Yes, sir.
And you'll find it there, again, is called Stories in Stones, Our Heritage of Evidence. Let's go right back to the phone lines. Keith is calling from Napier, Nebraska. Hi, Keith, you're on the air.
Yes, thanks for taking my call. I was just, did your guest, did he ever read any books or see any films by Christian J. Pinto? I'm sure that he would disagree with some of what you're saying about Thomas Jefferson, because a lot of these people that founded our nation were Freemasons, and there's a lot of things that Thomas Jefferson would have said and did that led our nation astray into Freemasonry.
Okay, thank you for the comment, Tim.
Well, this is true, and a number of them had religious beliefs that we wouldn't agree with either. And yet we take a look at the government that they gave us. In spite of their flaws, they still were able to give us, through common grace, the greatest, freest country in the world.
Yeah, and that's another whole issue on the Freemasonry and the founders in that regard. But thank you for raising that issue here today. John in Los Lunas, New Mexico, you're on the air.
Hi, God bless the USA. With the way that the Washington D.C. is laid out, due to the pagan of Egypt to resurrect Osiris into the president every year, and the fact that there's a pyramid in back of our dollar with the eye of Nimrod right on top of it, man, I would say that it's been pretty far from God from day one. But thank you, Jesus Christ, whom you have revealed yourself to. Amen.
Okay, thank you for your comment. And I'll say this, the most important aspect is not who occupies the White House, it's who occupies your heart.
Exactly.
And so critical in all of this. But again, there's a whole history there as well, and does not rest solely upon the founding of the United States. But you're going to find a number of things through the development of this nation that don't measure up to the truths of Scripture.
No, they don't. And you take a look at, 1 Corinthians chapter 10, when Paul recounts the history of Israel. They did some horrible things, and God punished them for that. There's biographies of the life of David, incidents in David's life that you can't celebrate, and yet God said, David is a man after my own heart. So we celebrate the good, and we acknowledge that there's flaws, but we don't negate the whole person because of the flaw.
Right. And again, we have the greatest nation on earth as far as it was called the experiment. And wasn't it John Adams who said that it was made for religious and moral people, and our Constitution's not going to be good for anything else other than that?
Right. And with a representative republic, it is good for moral people. You have to be able to obey the concepts and the principles of law. You cannot have anarchy. You cannot have every man doing that which is right in their own eyes.
Right.
A representative republic is obeying the law.
Brian is calling from Hebron, Kentucky. Brian, you're on the air.
Hi, good afternoon there, brothers. Thank you, Jim, for having Dr. Tim on there. Another guy that I'm going to have to start sharing on social media. I like to share everything about our founding fathers from either, like you were saying, William Fetter. Wall Builders has an enormous book of everything from the founding fathers' original intent and original writings. And you start to hear that 29 of our 56 signers are a Declaration of Independence. We're biblical scholars, theologians. And I just wanted to ask your guest, Dr. Tim, there, what he knew and what he could tell our listeners about Dr. Benjamin Rush.
Okay, Dr. Benjamin Rush was the youngest signer of the Declaration of Independence. As a matter of fact, he was a good friend with Thomas Jefferson, and he would sign his letters to Jefferson, your compatriot of 1776. In his mind, the high water mark of his life was signing the Declaration of Independence. And too often we look at the painting in the Capitol building, and we just think, oh, just a bunch of dead guys who have gone on before us. But they were people just like us. As a matter of fact, Benjamin Rush was very much interested in Richard Stockton's daughter, and he was not getting anywhere as far as her showing interest in him. And so one day he said, I heard a message from John Witherspoon. And she said, John Witherspoon, another signer of the Declaration of Independence, is my favorite preacher. Because of that, Richard Stockton allows his daughter to marry Benjamin Rush. Benjamin Rush is founder of the American Bible Society, Philadelphia Sunday School movement. He does Surgeon General of the Continental Army. Benjamin Rush is one of those that, not so much a forgotten founder like Roger Sherman, but someone that we could celebrate as well.
Thank you for the call here. We've got a caller from Milwaukee. Go ahead, caller. You're on the air.
Yes, I just have a question. Since those that want to rewrite history, a lot of that have to do with taking down anyone that had anything to do with slavery through the years. Well, wouldn't that, if they want to rewrite history, wouldn't that X out slavery? I mean, wouldn't they want to rewrite history and that would include slavery? I mean, what would that do to their agenda then? I mean, since they want to attack everyone that had anything to do with the history of slavery in this country.
Okay, thank you.
Well, we are in a position where they've leveled everybody except themselves. And, we all know, we all have flaws, we all have contradictions in our lives. We all look back at earlier times in our life and we wish we would have done something different. And yet the reality of it is, the poet has said, time is forever barred the way. We can't return to yesterday. Out of reach, beyond the blue, tomorrow waits in vain for you. So take today, enjoy its measure. Soon it will be yesterday's treasure.
Thank you. Grady in Monticello, you're on the air.
Yes, this is Randy Lee. I understand everything you gentlemen have been talking about, but you are way above what is actually happened. In the last 60 years, the NEA has put together a public school curriculum, which basically has made certain that 80% of the public school system children graduate as dysfunctional, semi-illiterate.
I'm going to have to stop you there because we only got a quarter of a minute left and want you to have a response here, Tim.
Well, there definitely is. We've gone from educating young people to indoctrinating them. And when you can indoctrinate them, you can get them to follow the herd, follow the crowd. And what we need today is teaching the ability to think critically and to act biblically in our society.
Thank you for your call, and we apologize to others on hold. We have run out of time. Our guest today, Tim Schmig, who is Director of Stories and Stones and Executive Director of Michigan Association of Christian Schools. If you want to correspond further with him, timschmig@gmail.com. Tim Schmig, SCHMIG, @gmail.com. God bless you, folks. Thanks for listening.
You've been listening to Crosstalk via satellite and the internet from VCY America. Views expressed may or may not be those of this station. For a CD of today's program, send a donation of $6 or more to VCY Tape Ministry, 3434 West Kilbourne Avenue, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, 53208, or download by RSS or podcast from crosstalkamerica.com. And join us again for Crosstalk.